Now, the former South African president, Jacob Zuma, has given 5 days to hand himself in after a judge sentenced him to 15 months in jail. Zuma has been found guilty of contempt for failing to appear before an inquiry investigating corruption during his time in office. Zain Basravi has this report.
For the first time, a former South African leader is facing jail time. Jacob Zuma has been ordered to surrender himself to police within 5 days. He was sentenced to 15 months for failing to appear at a corruption hearing. The Constitutional Court judge's decision leaves the former president with few legal options.
And the extent to which Mr. Zuma has attempted to justify his defiance through public statements is of no relevance. The statements were not formally pleaded, so fall to be disregarded. The Constitutional Court can do nothing but conclude that Mr. Zuma is guilty of the crime of contempt of court.
Zuma resigned from office in 2018 after his own party threatened to pass a vote of no confidence against him over allegations of high-level financial corruption and graft during his time as president and deputy president. He's always maintained his innocence, but has not cooperated with investigators.
May I ask you then as to how you plead to the charges that have been put to you?
I plead not guilty.
Allegations against Zuma include many titans of industry, whom he is said to have allowed to plunder state resources and influence state policy. South Africa's Chief Justice has described Zuma's defense and his attempt to garner public support as insulting to the people of the country. Years of corruption scandals have left South Africa's new leaders with an unenviable task of restoring investor confidence in Africa's most industrialized economy. Zain Basravi, Al Jazeera.
Let's speak to our correspondent Fahmida Miller, who is in Johannesburg. The judge there pretty damning in her ruling. How has this verdict gone down in South Africa?
Well, I think there are a couple of different reactions to this judgment by the Constitutional Court. Certainly observers, commentators, academics lauding the court for the supremacy of the rule of law, in that the Constitutional Court was unambiguous when it said that Jacob Zuma, his actions have defied the courts, defied the Commission of Inquiry into corruption in South Africa by him not wanting to testify at that inquiry despite a number of appeals, including a court summons. And so in terms of the supremacy of the Constitutional Court, South Africa's constitution, and that no one is above the law, this is very important, especially in the context of trying to fight large-scale corruption in this country. But Jacob Zuma also has his supporters. In the months that have preceded this judgment, he has said that he's been vilified, that there's a political agenda against him, and that he's been treated unfairly, and that the Constitutional Court and other courts are being used to target the former president. And there are people who believe that this is part of a political agenda in terms of the difficulties the African National Congress is facing with regard to its fight to corruption. That party is divided. And if people were to be targeted or had to be charged for being involved in corruption, there are a number of high-ranking ANC individuals or leadership that could potentially face the music. And so this is concerning for people who say that the ANC is being targeted, the former president's being targeted, and this isn't really about corruption, but really about politics and what's going on in the country at the moment. So there has been a mixed reaction to this verdict, to this judgment, and I suppose many are waiting to see what happens within the next 5 days when it's expected that Jacob Zuma should hand himself over to police.
Many thanks for that, Fahmida Miller, there for us in Johannesburg. We can get a little more analysis on this. Joining us on Skype from Cape Town is Sanusha Naidu, Senior Research Associate at the Institute for Global Dialogue. Many thanks for joining us on the News Hour. Look, they could have fined Zuma. Why do you think the verdict was so strict?
Good afternoon. I think the verdict was strict, particularly because, as your correspondent had indicated, Mr. Zuma has constantly tried many ways in which to manipulate his judicial process. So he's constantly made the assumption and made the accusation that he is part of a political campaign to discredit him, to target him, to malign him. And so as much as he theoretically says that I want to have my day in court and I'm willing to go to prison if that is what will happen, he's not really giving any kind of genuine commitment to those statements he makes. He constantly argues that the judiciary is biased against him. He challenges the legitimacy of the judiciary, and he challenges the credibility of the judiciary. He has also challenged the Constitutional Court justices as well as the various judges in our judicial process. He's also went out and said that they are targeting him and they have a political agenda against him. This has caused a lot of tension on the ground, where supporters of Mr. Zuma have come out and made similar statements and have also gone to the point of threatening the lives of judges and basically putting those threats on social media spaces. So I think this judgment is critical to say to the broader South African public that nobody, even if it's Mr. Zuma, a former head of state, he's not above the law. But I think what makes Mr. Zuma's case even more important and strategic is that in that judgment read by the Constitutional Justice Kampepe, she mentioned that, Mr. Zuma is exceptional, but not exceptional where he's above the law. He's exceptional because he was a former state president and he knows what the Constitution says, and he actually took office and he abided by the oath of that presidency that he took. So he is not above the law in that context.
Sanusha, it's interesting, just reading through some comments from people on Twitter, very skeptical that he's actually going to end up in jail. What do you think is going to happen? Is he going to uphold or adhere to this mandate? Does he have a choice?
Technically, he doesn't have a choice because this is the highest apex court in the land. This is the Constitutional Court. There's no higher court than this. There's no process for his legal team to appeal this decision. There's nowhere to go. So technically speaking, if he doesn't abide by the ruling and what the justices had ruled in terms of giving him 5 days before he then presents himself to a police station and says, I'm ready to serve this 15-month sentence, then of course he's in a bigger set of legal dilemma and troubles. But I think what people are possibly feeling on the ground and within the court of public opinion is that we've seen this before, where Mr. Zuma has come to this tipping point, and of course something happens and then he's pulled back, or something happens and justice doesn't prevail. But I think this time around it is going to prevail. I think that at the end of the day, where I'm very concerned is what happens in the support base of Mr. Jacob Zuma, especially those sections of the population and in the party that support him and have been guarding his house. The MK soldiers, the Mkhonto were soldiers of the African National Congress, which is not a legitimate kind of association, but they've been standing guard outside his homestead in KwaZulu-Natal, in Kanjla, and they've been arguing as well that they're not going to let anybody put their hands on Mr. Jacob Zuma. So I think that for me is where a lot of the challenges lie in terms of the powder keg and the explosiveness of what transpires hereafter, and whether Mr. Zuma does actually present himself to the police station. Having said that, I think his family have indicated in tweets that they will actually take him to the court or to the police station, because their argument is that Mr. Zuma is fearless. He's not afraid to go to prison, and more importantly, they want him to serve this term in KwaZulu-Natal, his home province, and not in Gauteng. So I think at the end of the day, there's indications that he's going to go. But I think, at the end, on the other side of the spectrum is what the supporters do.
We'll have to see. He's got 5 days. Sanusha Naidu, good to talk to you, Senior Research Associate at the Institute for Global Dialogue.